Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today I wanted to do our Should You Buy video on the new Consolidated Outlands Hoverquad. The quad is a ground vehicle, much like the Dragonfly and the Nox, that are capable of hovering above the ground, and it's not necessarily just a ground vehicle because it can technically fly in space, so from a vehicle, non-ship perspective, it makes it fairly versatile in its usage. The price on the quad is cheap, coming in at $25 war bond, which means using new cash into the game, or $30 store credit pricing. So let's talk a little bit about what the Hoverquad is before we start talking about this ship and if it's worth your investment or not. The Hoverquad leverages the same hover technology that Consolidated Outlands introduced on the Nomad ship, and this was actually released to be paired nicely with the Nomad's truck bed to allow for a companion vehicle for traveling. I think that's fine. I don't see a lot of natural need where things stand today to bring a non-industrial type vehicle along with you. For example, the Nomad can fly around on its own, and eventually there may be areas that it can't reach, but for now, things like the rock for mining or maybe a combat-oriented vehicle would make a little bit more sense in my mind. Either way, it's a cool little vehicle. The hover ability, much like on the Dragonfly, the Nox, and the eventual X1, means that you don't have wheels on the ground, so terrain is far less of an issue, and with the rework to hover gameplay, these vehicles drive significantly better than before. You still need to watch out for trees and taller rocks, but for the most part, driving over terrain is a relatively simple experience. The Hoverquad is zippy, featuring better maneuverability than the bikes. However, it does have lower top speed and acceleration than the bikes. I actually prefer the idea of better control on the quad than the top speed on the bikes because you need to be able to react to terrain, and having a tighter turning radius means that you can travel safer at higher speeds, knowing you have a little bit better control even if you suffer from a slightly lower top speed. Now, what I just said is what CIG said the balance should be. So that is what I think will be eventually implemented. However, when you look at the numbers currently, the Hoverquad has a speed of 125 meters per second with a top speed of 600, though I think ground vehicles are capped at 200 in atmosphere anyways. The Dragonfly is 65 meters per second and 500 meters per second respectively, so it is slower and with less maneuverability, so the quad is just objectively better at the moment from a driving perspective. From a sizing perspective, the Hoverquad comes in at 5.15 meters long, 1.45 meters wide, and 1.32 meters tall, which is a little less long and wide than a Dragonfly. The Dragonfly does, however, have the compact mode for storage, so where the Hoverquad just lands and kind of sits as it fits. The quad being smaller is also lighter at 1,249 kilograms versus 2,068 on the Dragonfly, which is in part due to the size, but also based on another factor to consider, which is what is missing. The quad has vehicle-sized components, but it totally lacks any weaponry or shielding. So while it is said to be a bit more durable from a hull perspective, you're really kind of lacking out on the defenses, or it really just able to do any damage in return by lacking weaponry. So this is purely a vehicle to be used in transport. No combat should be done in the Hoverquad. Now, even using this for approaching a bunker is a questionable decision, considering all of the hover vehicles are picked up and fired at by the turrets at the bunker sites. And without shields, you're going to drop pretty quick. The quad's durability from an HP perspective currently is 3,500 HP overall, with 750 allocated to the nose and body independently. If you compare that to the Dragonfly, that has 2,120 overall, 880 on the body, and only 50 on the nose, which does reinforce the durability that the quad is supposed to have, but the lack of a shield can't be overstated as significant of an impact as that can have. The quad has a crew of one, so it is more aligned to the Nox than to the Dragonfly, which comes with the second seat where someone could gun, which means that not having that gunner and not having weapons, you still have no offensive ability. That's fine. Not everything in the game needs to be combat oriented, and honestly, even the hover bikes are fairly anemic when it comes to their firepower, and landing shots can be challenging based on the speed and the flight model. So it's not a huge loss, but it's important to be noted. From a cargo perspective, it's a little interesting. We know the Dragonfly has the saddlebags where it's supposed to carry a little cargo. And remember that cargo is different than your personal items. And the quad has no cargo ability. What it does have, though, is an internal storage area for personal items, with the total being about 125,000 micro SCU. That's unique to the other bikes, so you have the option to store some smaller items internally, and from a comparison perspective, it's about 20% of what a small ship like an Aurora can carry. It's not really big enough for long arm weaponry or armor, so don't expect to be carrying large items in there, and you don't have a weapons rack on the bike, so you're really restricted to what your armor can carry from a weapons perspective. Inside that micro storage, you could carry things like med pens or food or water or other just important smaller items. The size of the quad means that you can fit in a whole lot of ships, basically anything a Dragonfly will fit in. The big question always seems to be if these ground vehicles will fit in an Avenger, and the answer is yes. You do have some scraping from the hover on your head when you try and enter, and when you're trying to exit, you kind of see some sparks and things. But for the most part, everything seems fine. Once you shut off the engines, it will drop to the deck and stay put during flight. So let's get to the real part of the video, the overall recommendation on if you should buy the Hoverquad. And here's the deal. From a value per money spent perspective, it never, ever, ever makes sense to buy a ground vehicle with real money because they're so cheap to buy in the game. So while the Hoverquad's not available for sale in this patch, chances are it'll be for sale at in-game shops in 3.17. And I'm expecting it to be cheaper than a Dragonfly, which only costs 272,000 UEC, which really can be earned in a single night of Xenothreat. It just doesn't make sense to spend the money and expect a ton of return, especially on ground vehicles which are much more limited in functionality, their ability to travel, and they require other vehicles to carry them around. So I really look at this and say, there's two types of people that should buy the quad. One, for those that are looking for an LTI token to be able to turn this into another ship with LTI, you're really just not going to find a cheaper token than $25. So from that perspective, it is a great purchase. The other is just those that don't have time to play that much. They love the design of this quad and they want to support the project. And if you check off all three of those boxes, it may be good for you. Anyone else that's interested probably should just wait until 3.17 and pick it up in-game at that point. I also look at the differences between the Dragonfly and the quad, and I just find a whole lot more value in the Dragonfly, which means that if you were to spend more money on something, the Dragonfly is just flat out better bet overall. So for me, I think while the quad is fun, cool, and an interesting little vehicle, should you buy the quad? Probably not. So that's the video. I hope it provided some clarity and insight. If you have questions on the vehicle or in general, feel free to drop a comment below. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more coming soon, and have yourselves a wonderful day. Take care.